Here we are. I'm on camera. I'm on my way down to the Ouseburn. It's a lovely sunny day, a little bit windy. I was doing the video at the top, but it's a bit noisy because there's a couple of garages up there. So I'm just heading down for the Victoria Tunnel tour. Don't want to get run over because it's quite busy around here. So as I say, we're just heading down here, and as soon as I get down the bottom and the tour people turn up, then I'll come back on camera. Hi guys, back again. As you can see, we're just heading down towards this tour. I've let people go in front because I didn't want to disturb them. So as you can see, so that's where we're heading this way.
Yeah.
It's quite nice down there in the summer. So anyways, the guy's going to talk again.
Just come down here so you can appreciate the Ouseburn Valley, because it's because of the Ouseburn Valley and what went on down here why we needed an air because this valley now is largely used for recreational purposes and leisure, but back in the day it was the heart of the Industrial Revolution on Tyneside. Along this valley were all sorts of different industries. Here, which is now a sick farm, was a lead works. The building we've just come past, the Clooney, that was a flax mill making textiles, and then further down the valley there were industries. Because of that, it made the valley a target for enemy bombers coming across, and there you see the big chimneys and campouts. That was used at the start of the war as a navigation aid for the Luftwaffe. They came across the North Sea, followed the River Tyne, and they could see that big chimney. So they knew if they got there, they were over the industry, so they could drop their bombs there and do the damage. So what happened was the chimney, which wasn't in use by then anyway, they took the top half of it off. One man went to the top with a hammer and a chisel, and he took it off one brick at a time, and the bricks were thrown down. Oh, excuse me a minute. Somebody called me, I don't want to call. Yeah, he took it down one brick at a time, so it was only half the height. So that's the big chimney. Along the valley, as I said, there were lots of industries. One of them was a glass works, and they used to manufacture glass bowls. When all the industry went, a local artist got a commission to build a monument or a reminder about the industry. So this is the first one. He made a little green bottle, and that represents the industry that was along there. As we walk along the valley, you're on a mission between one in between, the concrete one, that's from the 1980s, so that wasn't there when they did it. But it is famous because it was the first concrete bridge in Britain held together with glue. Right, so it's big concrete blocks and they were fastened together with epoxy resin glue. It might be worth thinking about that if you use the metro towards the coast. Right, let's go counting bottles. And the river is tidal at the moment.
Guys, I'm going to turn this camera around so you can actually see forward and not keep looking at me. So I'll be able to handle the gimbal a little bit better, so I'll press stop. And then I'll turn it around.
100 years until the 1930s, and in the 1930s, because of the threat of war in Europe, the city council thought, well, what can we do to protect the residents of this valley? And they came up with 3 ideas. The first idea was this. It's called an Anderson shelter. It's just like a corrugated shed, and if you were eligible for one, you were given it by the government. You dug a hole in your back garden, you buried it half its depth, and then you covered the top of it with earth. And then you sat in there if there was an air raid. And people were safe while they were in there. They might be cold, they might be wet, they might be dark, but they were safe. The only problem around here is a lot of the terraced houses didn't have gardens, so you couldn't get an Anderson shelter. So instead, as an alternative, the government came up with this idea, a Morrison Shelter named after one of the politicians. It looks like a heavy-duty dining table, and that's because it is. At the base there is a sheet of strong metal, and on the top a sheet of strong metal. And then there was wire mesh put around the sides. So you put this in your house. If there was an air raid warning, you got your family in there, and again you were safe if your house was hit by a direct hit, because all the rubble would land on the top and it wouldn't come in the sides because of the wire mesh. Brilliant, but very, very heavy. So if you had houses like these, modern ones, with more than one floor, you couldn't use them above the ground floor. They were too heavy, they would have come straight through your bedroom floor. So those 2 things weren't possible. So then the city council remembered, you know, there's a tunnel underneath Newcastle. It might be a bit mucky, but we could use that as an air raid shelter. They had to find it first of all because they hadn't kept accurate maps. So eventually they found it, cleaned it out, fitted it with essential fitments to make life a bit pleasant under there, and it became an air raid shelter. So now let's go back to 1941. You've just finished work, you've come home and you've had a meagre tea because food was rationed, so you didn't get much to eat, and you couldn't sit down and watch TV because they weren't in use then. But it was dark outside and you heard the air raid siren. What would you do? It's the air raid shelter. Ah, look! Aeroplanes coming from across the North Sea. Let's get in there. Right, would you like to follow me, please? Some of these Second World War posters or replicas of them, and this I think is quite relevant after a year or two of COVID. coughs and sneezes, spread diseases, use a handkerchief. Have you all got a handkerchief with you? Brilliant. Right, let's go a bit further. And this one. Anybody recognise him? Yeah, Winston Churchill. He was the Prime Minister during the war. And a lot of people believe it was thanks to his efforts that the Allies actually won. Right, we're going to turn right here and enter the tunnel. Thread along here, don't go too far. Right. I don't know if Jeff mentioned this channel of water. It will be our companion all afternoon. It is just water, but please don't be tempted to drink it, and don't do anything else with it, please. We'll explain why later on. Right, we've entered the tunnel, but we would not be safe from enemy bombing here, because we're very close to the entrance. And one of the things that the British government were worried about in the war was that the enemy might use poisonous gas like they had done in the First World War. So if they dropped bombs in the Ouseburn Valley that contained poisonous gas, like mustard gas and so on, which is heavier than the air, it would have rolled down that ramp we've come down, and it would start to fill up this tunnel that we're in. But you were all issued with a gas mask. So when you left home, you would make sure you carried it with you. And another thing that was developed is just here. There are 7 entrances to the tunnel now, and near each entrance there's some rectangles of yellow paint. There's one here, and there's one near the gentleman in the white sweatshirt. Just a patch of yellow paint. Why do you think that was put there, near every entrance?
People can find the exits on.
Yeah, it is bright, it helps you find the exit, but you couldn't go anywhere else, so you just have to walk up and down. It's actually special smart paint, although this is 70 years old, it might not be that smart anymore. But if there was poisonous gas here, it would change colour. So instead of being yellow, it changes to pink. So if you were down here and you saw that these patches were turning pink, you would know you would have to put your gas mask on. If it was already pink, then you were dead anyway, so you wouldn't need to worry. Right? Gas detection paint. Also, we're not very deep here. We're only about 15 feet, I'm old-fashioned, I think, in feet, below the surface. So if an enemy bomb made a direct hit above us, it would penetrate the tunnel. Right? If your bomb came through, boom! The bricks would all collapse on top of you, what would happen to you? Yeah, you'd be dead. You'd be in bits on the floor. And also, the bits of brick and other rubble, because of the blast from the explosion, would go all the way up the tunnel or down the tunnel, and there was nothing to stop it. So people who were in this bit might die, but also people further down the tunnel might die. So again, the government came up with this idea. They built a wall across the tunnel. Not just one wall, but there are 3 walls there. They're all about halfway across the width of the tunnel. There's 3 of them, they fit together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. And they're called blast walls. Because the idea is if a bomb did explode here and the blast started to travel up the tunnel, the blast walls would slow it down and maybe even stop it. They learned that from war in the trenches in the First World War. If there's a barrier, it stopped the blast. And they came up with a name for them, these walls. They called them blast walls. Right, before we continue going deeper. Is everybody still okay being underground with an old man? Excellent. Right, if you'd like to follow me, we're going to go through 2 sets of blast walls. Until we get deep enough, we are not safe. We're only safe after we've gone through 5 sets of blast walls. Right, so make sure you count them and then we know we see. Right, let's go through this one. When the tunnel was originally built in Victorian times, it was for transporting coal. And there was one entrance at the mine, 2.5 miles that direction, and there was one exit down by the river. But when they made it into an air raid shelter, they decided they needed more entrances. We'll see others further on. And also they had to clean it up because it was full of coal, dust and so on. It wasn't a very pleasant place to come into. And to make it nice for people, they put some lights in here. You can see one here, one of the original. This is a 1940s light fitting. The cable is 1940s electrics. I wouldn't touch it if I were you. You don't know whether it's that safe. But they also painted the roof. No more yellow paint because we've come away from the entrance. But what colour's here now? Hard question. White. It's called lime wash. That's what they used to paint the walls with. And it was there for 2 reasons. One, because it's white, what a little light you had does get reflected. So you get a bit of a bonus light from it. The other thing is to do with that poster where I started. Lime wash has got a very high alkali content in it, and it kills germs and bugs. So all these Geordies who were rushing into the tunnel to be saved, if they were coughing and sneezing and they didn't have handkerchiefs, it's possible that some of their germs ended up on the walls. But the lime wash acted as a mild antiseptic. It killed the germs. So pretty clever stuff. Right, between the last blast wall we came through and the next one, which has got a special gate on it, there are 4 lights. Originally the lighting was in the ceiling, but there were too many tall people. They kept banging into it and damaged the light, so it was brought down to the side. Right, what we'll do on a count of 3, see if any of you are scaredy cats, we're going to see what it was like down here in a total blackout. Right, so I'll count down to 3 and then I'll ask you to turn your torches off just for a short while. 1, 2, 3, off! Right, I've got mine on, I'll turn mine off. There you go. Can you actually see the person you're standing next to? No. Total and utter blackness. Now the lights they put in here, there are 4 between the 2 sets of blast walls. They saved money on the light bulbs. They used 14 watt bulbs like this. That's the amount of light you got down here. Not a vast amount. Right, I'll let you put your torches back on. Right, let's go through another blast wall.
Trip accidents and all sorts, isn't it? People banging their head out. Children will scream in their heads.
Okay. You'll notice the low level modern lighting has gone now, where more like it was during the war, and here's a bit more of the 1940s electrics. Here, there are 3 blocks of wood, which we know for a fact were there in the war. And we know as well that this was the Victoria Tunnel Hospital. The tunnel was licensed for up to 10,000 people, although it never actually filled up totally, but it was licensed to take that many. So obviously there would be a few accidents, people might have been taken ill. So here there was a worktop and there were some cupboards underneath. And this was the nurses' station, so if you were feeling ill or if you had an accident, you would come and see the nurses. 10,000 people, how many nurses do you think were allocated? I'll give you a clue, it's between 2 and 4. 3 nurses for 10,000 people. So modern nurses, like my daughter, think they have to work hard, but I think they have a better ratio than 1 to 3,000. Sometimes the electrics that they put in didn't work, there were power cuts. So there were wardens employed to keep control underground, to make sure people weren't doing things they shouldn't. But also the wardens would bring these hurricane lamps out if there was a power cut. But they burnt paraffin and it was very smelly. But you will see hooks like this one in places, and that's where they would have hung them if there was a power cut. Right, go a bit further. Just come a bit closer up here. And I do have some strange habits. One of the habits I've got is I talk to blast walls. So if you just bear with me. Hello, wall! Hello! What do you notice? There's an echo in the next part. In this part where it's just ordinary brick, you don't get an echo. Through here, you do get an echo. And that's because of something that happened in 2006. We are now underneath the Lime Square apartments that I showed you in the valley. They're just above our head, a few feet up. But when they were being built, they knew that this tunnel was here, and they knew it was a listed structure, that they mustn't damage it. So they said, what we'll do for the foundations is put concrete piles 2 meters on either side of the tunnel, and that'll keep it safe. So that's what they did, and it did work at first. But one day, one of the piles as it was being driven into the ground hit a massive piece of rock, and that piece of rock came crashing through the side of the tunnel. The bricks collapsed, and we had to close the tunnel for a couple of years until the powers that be decided who would pay for a repair. Eventually it was a Heritage Lottery Fund grant that paid for the repair. And what they did, they put a metal mesh around the shape of the tunnel, and then they sprayed ferro concrete over the top of that mesh. 6 inches thick. Ferro concrete's the best stuff you can get. And that means that the next part of the tunnel we're going to go through is the strongest part. So if there's an earthquake in Newcastle this afternoon, get in that bit and I guarantee you'll be safe. And I can guarantee that because the people who did the repair guaranteed their work for 2,000 years. Right, so that's the safe bit. I call it the echo chamber. So let's go through the echo chamber.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Never! Who was that? That was the church for one of his famous wartime speeches. Right, the next part of the tunnel is a bit damp and a bit muddy. It's no worse than the pavements outside when it rains a lot, but the walls are a bit dodgy, so please don't lean on the walls. If you do, you might end up swearing, and we don't want that, do we? Right, let's go through here. So please keep away from the walls. We've just gone through a 21st century repair, and that was guaranteed for 2,000 years. Here, there's another repair, but this was put in during the Second World War. Because above this tunnel, there is another one. Do you remember the stairs to nowhere? I pointed out above the swans. Up that bank, there used to be another railway that was built after this tunnel. That railway is called the Tyneside Riverside Horseshoe Railway. It used to carry goods from Manners Goods Yards, where the metro station is now, down to the river, and it also brought goods back up. But when that railway was running, this tunnel was out of use, and all the railway, the trains going across the top, they rattled a lot and they carried heavy goods, and it damaged this tunnel. If we were standing here in 1939, we would see a hole here. See, it's hollow. That's where the hole was. And when the trains came over, you could see the bricks wobbling a bit. And when the trains put their brakes on, sparks would come through here. So when this tunnel was made into a air raid shelter, they thought, oh, we don't want sparks coming in. We'd better do something about it. So that's why this short section is concrete again. That railway above us closed in 1969, and all they did when it closed was brick up the entrance and the exit to it and left it. They didn't fill it in or anything. So when it rains in Newcastle, like it has done quite a lot this week, the tunnel above us fills up with rainwater, and that water has to go somewhere. So it finds its way through the rocks and the bricks, and it comes out flowing down our walls, and it leaves behind this white stuff which is called calcite. It's like stalactites and stalagmites that you get in limestone caves. This is harmless, won't harm you, but you might need to sanitize your hands afterwards. But they also left the railway lines above us. So on this side you can see this brown, and that's just water trickling down, but it's got rust in it from the tracks above us. Now if you touch that, you'll have brown fingers for about 3 weeks. I know because I've done it. I told my wife we'd run out of toilet paper, but that's a different story. And if you get it on your clothes, again, I know because I've done it, it doesn't wash out. So please be careful where you see the brown. As we go through the repair, there is some on the right-hand side as well as the left, so please take care. Right, let's go through it. It's a bit lower, so watch the head. Everybody still okay underground? And of course you've all paid for the privilege of coming down here, and you're enjoying yourselves, aren't you? Yep. Oh, that's good. Right, back in the 1940s, people didn't have to pay to come down here, but they weren't coming down for educational purposes or anything. They were coming down here because their life depended upon it. But the good news is that during the Second World War, this tunnel was in use every night, and nobody died down here, so that was a positive thing. But we've stopped here. It's often better if you wind it when you've got it on your head. If not, my good-looking assistant will help you. Right. Here, just before this blast wall, there was a sad story. Nobody died in the tunnel, but somebody did die above it. In May 1941, 5th to the 6th of May, that night, it was one of the biggest raids ever on Newcastle. And bombs fell on Tarset Street. Remember where I pointed it out to you? And 3 or 4 houses were really badly damaged, but not so much that the people were homeless. They told, you know, you might have lost a room or two, but your house is still livable in. One of the bombs didn't explode on contact with the ground. It hit the ground and it penetrated down to about 10 to 15 feet below the surface before it exploded. And when it exploded, it formed a chamber under the ground connected to the surface through a shaft. The shaft was about 2 foot wide. So the council, and it's a thing if you're into technical things, it's called a camouflet. The council came out and they had a look at it and they thought, well, what can we do? I know, we'll just put some planks over the top and we'll cover it with a tarpaulin and that'll be absolutely fine. And it was, for 3 weeks. Now, at the end of May, what is now the May bank holiday time, a young girl called Irene Page, who was 7 years old, she was sent to a lady's address in Tarset Street with a message from her mother. So she gave the message, and then she asked, could she go and have a look at the camouflet, because she knew the technical term. And the woman, Mrs. Malarkey, said, yeah, go and have a look, but be careful. So Irene went along to have a look, and it had been raining, because it does that in Newcastle, and she slipped on the tarpaulin. And she went through the planks and disappeared underground, and she shouted, "Help!" in a little girl's voice, "Help! Help!" But it very quickly went quiet. By then, people from the nearby houses were out wondering what was going on, but nobody took charge. There was a young lad, I'll just need to check my notes on his age, he was 12 years old. He was called Ernest Smith, but he was known as Sonny because he was always happy and joking. And he took control of the situation. He said, right, missus, give me your washing line. I'm a Boy Scout, I know about knots and I know about mountain rescue, so lower me down and I'll get Irene and I'll bring her out. So that's what they did. They gave him the rope and he lowered himself down, and at first they could feel him walking around, but very quickly the rope went slack and he stopped moving. So then the local residents thought, oh, we'd better do something about this. They're not too good. We've got 2 bairns down there and we don't know what's happening. So they sent for a couple of auxiliary firemen who lived in the next street. A guy called John Tulip and another one called George Wanless. John Tulip came along, assessed the situation very quickly, and then he got the rope and he went down. And he found Sonny down in the chamber, unconscious, but he was able to bring him up and left him in the back garden, and he went down for Irene. But once he got down there for Irene, again the rope stopped moving. So there was a girl, a man, and a boy at the surface who was unconscious. So then the next auxiliary fireman set off. He took the rope and he went down. But what do you think happened? Yeah, it stopped moving. He was down there. So 2 adults, 1 child, and a child on the surface. So then they thought, oh my God, what's going on? We'd better get the professionals. So they got their mobile phone out and they phoned for the professionals, but they didn't, because they didn't have mobile phones. The nearest phone was near St. Dominic's Church. So they sent somebody up there to phone up. And it took a while, but eventually a fire engine arrived, and so did some ambulances. And on the fire engine, there was a guy called George Bruce. And he said, right, I'll go down. I know what I'm doing. I'll put my breathing apparatus on. His breathing apparatus was a damp cloth he wrapped around his face. So he went down. But when he got about halfway down, he found it difficult to breathe. So he shouted, help, help, get me out, I can't breathe. So they pulled him back out. His boss, Lawrence Young, who was much fitter, he's more like me rather than Jay, he then went down. And he was so fit, he actually found the people down there. And he brought them up, one at a time, to the surface, a bit like a hero. Then, the people who had been overcome were taken off to the RVI, and when they got there, what do you think happened? Yeah, they were all declared dead on arrival. So, all of them, apart from George Bruce and Lawrence Young, were dead on arrival at the hospital. The next day there was an inquiry. Somebody from the then young Newcastle University, I think it was called King's College then, came out and they measured the air quality in the chamber, and they found that it was full of carbon monoxide. And what had happened, when they put the cap on the hole, that had stopped any draft, so the carbon monoxide stayed down there. And it was all right until Irene fell down, and then she stirred it up. And that's what had killed the people, carbon monoxide poisoning. 70 years after that, a blue plaque was put up in Tarsett Street, which is above us, and this is just a copy of it. It tells you the story, and it tells you the people involved, the names of them and what they did. And also some of the people involved were given awards. So Sonny, the Boy Scout, he got the Scout Association Bronze Cross. George Wanless got a King's Commendation. George Bruce was commended, and Larry Young, the boss man, he got the George Medal. John Tulip got nothing. And what makes it even sadder is that John Tulip was Irene's uncle. So that one night, she lost a brother and she lost a daughter. So nobody died in the tunnel, but some died just above it. Everybody happy? Yep. Right, let's go around the corner.
Guys, I'm going to stop this video here. I'll see you all in part 2.